Have you ever wondered if being powerful could be worse than being weak? It sounds contradictory, right? But for 11, every supernatural ability came accompanied by pain, fear, and loneliness. Imagine growing up without a name, without a family, without affection, and still having to carry on your shoulders a power that nobody understands. Her life is a walking paradox. The stronger she is, the more vulnerable she feels inside. And the most curious thing is that this story is not just fiction. Everyone has felt pressured to prove their worth, to fit in somewhere, to exist in a way that pleases others. Today, we are going to dive into this universe, understand the fears, the anger, the bonds, and, mainly, the incredible journey of 11 to discover who she really is, without depending on anyone to validate her existence. If you are a fan of cinema psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let's go to the video. Who is the character? 11 does not enter the story as a heroine. She enters as a silence that weighs more than any word spoken aloud. She is presented to the world as a number, and that already reveals the size of the emotional wound she carries in her chest. When someone grows up being treated as an experiment, the brain learns that existing is the same as constantly proving value. It is like living in an endless test, where making mistakes is never safe and resting is never allowed. And deep down, this touches a very human fear, the fear of only being loved when useful. The laboratory was not just a physical place, it was a psychological mold that taught her to remain silent to survive. Silence became armor because talking too much meant pain, punishment, or abandonment. Many people experience something similar when growing up, hearing that it is better not to bother anyone. Gradually, a person learns to diminish themselves to fit in the world. 11 just took this to the extreme because her world was never kind. When she meets Mike and the boys, she does not only find friendship, she finds a real chance to exist as a person. There, nobody demands results, nobody demands performance, nobody requires perfection. She can make mistakes, get confused, act strangely, and still continue being accepted. This is almost a cultural shock for someone who has only known control and pressure. It is like discovering that love is not a transaction, it is a gift. Her clumsy way shows an emotional child who never had space to be a real child. She does not know how to play properly, does not know how to talk naturally, but feels everything intensely. It is like someone thrown directly into adulthood without going through the learning of affection. And this happens to more people than we imagine, only less visibly. Emotional power without maturity becomes confusion, and real power becomes danger. Her body is always on alert, as if danger had never ended. Even in moments of peace, her nervous system still expects the worst. This is typical of those who have lived trauma and learned that safety is temporary. How many people do not live like this, always ready to defend themselves, even without attack? The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Despite everything, 11 does not become cold. She becomes intensely craving for bonds. She loves fast, gets attached strongly, and protects as someone who never wants to lose again. It is like someone who has experienced emotional hunger and now does not know how to love gradually. Her love is urgent, intense, and sometimes even suffocating, because losing people for her always seems to mean returning to the void, more than learning to use powers. 11 needs to learn who she is without them. She starts to ask herself if there is something in her besides the strength she possesses. This is a question that many people carry hidden behind positions and roles. Who am I when I am not being useful, productive, or admired? 11 starts to build this answer very slowly, almost stumbling. The setup of 11 does not speak of supernatural abilities. It speaks of emotional identity. It speaks of someone trying to discover if she deserves to exist without needing to prove anything. And this prepares the ground for conflicts much deeper than external monsters. Because when identity is fragile, any loss becomes a huge threat. And it is precisely there that the next topic really starts to squeeze her heart. At some point in 11's life, a question arises that hurts more than any experiment. Who is she when not using her powers? Up to that point, everything that defined her existence came from what she could do, not from who she was as a person. This is dangerously common, only in subtler versions in our daily lives. Many people define themselves by work, performance, by the utility they have for others. When that disappears, identity wobbles, like a house built on unstable ground. When 11 loses her powers, it is not only the strength that disappears, it is the emotional ground. She does not only lose an ability, she loses the reason she was always seen as special. It is as if suddenly the world says, "And now, do you still have any worth?" This type of crisis happens when someone is fired, ends a relationship, or changes life stages. The emptiness that arises is not external, it is internal, it is existential. She starts to compare herself with normal people and feels smaller, displaced, inadequate. Before, she was different because she was powerful. Now she is different because she feels fragile. It is that feeling of not belonging anywhere, neither to the old world nor to the new one. Many people experience this when changing city, career, or even social circle. The problem is not changing, it is not knowing who you are during the change. 11 begins to confuse personal value with the ability to protect others. If she cannot save, then she feels she is worthless, that she is not enough. This reveals a dangerous belief. I am only loved when I am strong. How many people do not enter relationships trying to be the other person's emotional hero? When they fail, they feel they have failed as people, not just as support. Her silence in this phase becomes heavier, more insecure, more loaded with doubt. It is no longer only trauma. It is confusion about her own existence. She looks in the mirror and does not see a clear identity, only an absence of function. It is like when someone asks themselves, if I stop doing everything for others, will they still love me? This question is never spoken aloud, but it screams inside. Then comes the fear of being disposable, replaceable, of not being missed. For someone who grew up being used as a tool, this is almost an emotional death sentence. She did not learn to be loved for what she feels, only for what she produces. This creates a silent anxiety, which does not explode, but corrodes. It is the anguish of trying to deserve space instead of simply occupying it. This conflict makes 11 try to shape herself, fit, adapt to what others expect. She seeks signs of approval all the time, even without realizing it. This happens when someone changes the way they speak, act, or think just to be accepted. Identity becomes too flexible, almost liquid, without its own form, and the more she tries to please, the further she gets from herself. The real drama is not the absence of powers, it is the absence of a solid self-image. It is not knowing if there is value when there is no performance. This is the point where her story stops being supernatural and becomes deeply human. Because everyone, at some point, has asked themselves if they are enough the way they are. And this doubt begins to prepare the ground for an even more delicate conflict that comes right after. 11 carries inside her a constant fear of being left behind, even when everything seems fine. It is not a rational fear, it is a fear that comes from the emotional memory of someone who has already been discarded before. For her, bonds are not stable, they are temporary, almost borrowed. It is as if love had an expiration date, even without anyone saying when it will end. And this makes her love as if it were always the last chance. When she becomes attached to Mike, it is not only adolescent romance, it is an emotional anchor. He represents security, belonging, and the feeling of finally having a place in the world. The problem is, when one person becomes the only source of internal stability, the relationship stops being an exchange and becomes emotional survival. And then any distance seems like abandonment, even when it is not. This happens to many people who never had predictable bonds in childhood. A person grows up thinking they need to hold on to the other tightly to not lose them. But holding too tightly also tires, suffocates, and generates fear on both sides. Love becomes tension, not rest, becomes vigilance, not trust. 11 experiences this without knowing how to explain it, only feeling the tightness in her chest. When Mike distances himself, even due to confusion or immaturity, her world collapses. It is not about him, it is about what he symbolizes, emotional security. She does not react like someone hurt, but like someone threatened. It is the same feeling as someone thinking, if this ends, I end too, and this is too heavy for any relationship to sustain. That is why she tends to remain silent when something hurts, instead of talking. She prefers to endure the discomfort than risk losing the bond. Many people do this, accept emotional scraps out of fear of emptiness. It is the famous better this than nothing, only disguised as maturity. In reality, it is fear of being alone with oneself. Emotional dependence does not arise from love, it arises from internal insecurity. When a person does not feel enough alone, they use the other as support. The problem is that nobody can sustain someone completely for too long. This generates silent demands, unrealistic expectations, and accumulated frustration. 11 does not want to control, she just does not want to disappear again. Her attachment is intense because losing, for her, has always meant returning to nothing. It is not drama, it is pure emotional memory speaking louder than logic. She does not yet know how to create security within herself, so she tries to build it in the other, like building a house on someone else's land. It works for a while, but it is never totally safe. This conflict shows that 11's greatest fear is not being physically alone. It is feeling that she does not exist without someone confirming her importance. It is needing external proof to believe in her own value, and this prepares the way for an even more delicate issue, the clash between love and autonomy. Because loving without losing oneself is something she still has to learn. 11 did not learn to deal with anger. She learned to swallow it to the point of being unbearable. In the laboratory, feeling anger was dangerous because emotion meant punishment, so she learned to accumulate, not to express. The problem is that stored emotion does not disappear, it turns into an explosion, and when it explodes, it does not come out in drops, it comes out as a storm. That is why when she feels attacked, humiliated, or rejected, the reaction is too intense. It is not exaggeration, it is lack of emotional training. It is like someone who never learned to brake a car and only knows how to accelerate. She does not experience mild irritation, she goes straight to internal collapse. And with powers, this collapse becomes literally destructive. How many people do not say, "I do not get angry," when in reality they just do not know how to express it? The feeling accumulates until it turns into anxiety, sadness, or an outburst. 11 shows this process in a very clear way. She is the portrait of someone who never had permission to feel safely. So the body speaks when the mouth does not know how to speak. This conflict shows that 11's greatest enemy is not anger, it is the fear of her own emotion. She fears losing control and hurting those she loves. That is why she begins to withdraw, restrain herself, and hide emotionally. And this prepares the ground for the next dilemma, the fear of being a danger to those she loves. Because when you believe you are a threat, you start to isolate yourself for protection. In many moments, 11 does not see herself as someone powerful, but as someone dangerous. She begins to look at herself with distrust, as if she were a mistake of nature. It is not just fear of hurting others, it is fear of who she is inside. It is like when someone thinks, "What if the problem has always been me?" This thought does not shout, it whispers, but it keeps shaping everything. When something goes wrong around her, guilt comes automatically, almost instinctively. Even without evidence, she feels she must have some responsibility. This comes from a history where she was always associated with destruction and chaos. It is hard to grow up believing that you are a solution when you have always been treated as a problem. The label sticks to the skin, even when nobody else says anything. She begins to observe herself as if she were outside, always watching herself. Every intense emotion becomes a warning signal. Am I going over the limit? This creates a relationship of distrust with herself. It is like driving with the handbrake pulled all the time. You move, but never with total freedom. Many people live something similar without having powers, just with intense emotions. The person feels a lot, thinks a lot, reacts strongly, and begins to believe they are too much. Instead of learning to regulate, they learn to hide. 11 does this emotionally. She tries to diminish who she is, as if being intense were the same as being dangerous. The fear of being a monster creates a huge desire to distance herself. She begins to think that the best way to love is by staying away. It seems noble, but deep down, it is self-punishment. It is choosing solitude as a way to protect others, and also as a silent punishment for herself. When someone believes they are a threat, they begin to isolate themselves out of responsibility. It is not rejection, it is guilt disguised as maturity. She thinks she is being strong, when in reality, she is hurting herself. Many people do this in relationships, withdrawing without explaining, as if loving were always too dangerous. This conflict distorts 11's self-image in a deep way. She stops seeing herself as someone who needs to learn, and starts seeing herself as someone who needs to control herself. She trades growth for restraint, expression for vigilance. This suffocates identity and weakens self-esteem. It is like living apologizing for existing. The problem is not the power she carries, it is the judgment she makes of herself. She confuses intensity with wickedness, strength with danger, emotion with destruction. And while this does not change, she never feels really safe anywhere, because the fear is not outside, it is inside, in the way she sees herself. And it is exactly there that the next conflict is born, even more silent and deep. Did you like this topic, or do you want me to adjust something in the tone, deepen a point, or increase the text before we move on to the next one? Even surrounded by people, 11 often feels deeply alone. It is not the loneliness of being without company, it is the loneliness of not feeling truly understood. She looks around and realizes that nobody lives the world the way she does. This creates a sense of displacement, as if she were always one step out of place. It is being physically present, but emotionally absent from her own group. This loneliness comes from the fact that her story is too unique to be easily shared. How do you explain a childhood made of tests, pain, and absence of affection to someone who had a normal life? She even tries to fit in, but feels that a part of the puzzle is always missing. It is like speaking a language that nobody around fully masters. You may communicate, but you are never completely understood. Many people experience this when they feel that their experiences are too much for others. Then they begin to diminish their own story to fit into the conversation. 11 does something similar when she tries to act like just another normal teenager, but inside, she knows it is not that simple. Her identity does not fit into common molds. The problem is that trying to fit in all the time generates emotional fatigue. It is wearing a social mask that weighs more than it seems. She smiles, agrees, follows along, but inside, she is always adapting. It is like someone who lives asking permission to exist. This slowly wears down the sense of belonging. Emotional loneliness makes her overvalue the few bonds where she feels seen. When she finds someone who seems to understand a little more, she clings strongly. It is not simple neediness, it is hunger for recognition. It is wanting to be seen and to feel that someone truly sees who she is. Without filters, without labels, without fear, but this intense search for belonging can create dependence. When the person becomes the only safe place, everything begins to revolve around them. 11 is still learning to create security within herself. Meanwhile, she tries to find this emotional ground in others. It works, but it is as fragile as thin glass. Her loneliness is not drama, it is the result of a history without emotional mirrors. She never had someone who constantly validated her emotions, so she grows up not knowing if what she feels is normal, exaggerated, or wrong. This creates insecurity even to trust her own feelings. It is like living always asking for internal confirmation. This conflict shows that 11's greatest pain is not being alone. It is not feeling part of something. It is not the absence of people. It is the absence of identification. And this prepares the ground for her next emotional challenge. Because when belonging is not internal, it becomes an endless external search. And this search begins to directly clash with the need for autonomy. At some point in the journey, 11 begins to feel that loving someone could mean disappearing a little of herself. It is not that she does not want to love, it is that she is afraid of only existing through the other. Love becomes a place of shelter, but it also becomes a risk of annihilation. It is like living in a safe house, but one without its own windows. You are protected, but you no longer know who you are outside of it. She realizes that many of the choices she makes are linked to what the other expects of her. The way she acts changes, the way she speaks changes, even the way she sees herself changes. This happens when identity is still fragile and seeks external validation. Loving becomes an attempt to be accepted, not to be true. And this is more tiring than it seems. Many people confuse love with extreme adaptation. They think that loving is giving up parts of themselves to maintain the bond, but little by little, they lose themselves in the process without even noticing. 11 begins to feel this internal discomfort, even without being able to explain it. It is like a silent discomfort asking for space. When she tries to be what others expect, she feels that something inside her is suffocated. It is her own identity asking for air. She does not want to hurt anyone, but she also does not want to disappear. This is the central dilemma: how to love without abandoning yourself. A question that many adults still do not know how to answer. Healthy love does not ask you to diminish yourself, it asks you to expand. But 11 still has not had clear examples of this in life. She only knew relationships where she needed to adapt to survive, so the pattern repeats itself even when the context changes. The body follows emotional memory. This conflict makes her oscillate between giving too much and completely withdrawing. Either she loses herself in the other, or she closes herself off to not get lost. There is still no comfortable middle ground. It is like learning to walk on an emotional tightrope. Any misstep seems too dangerous. Emotional autonomy means being able to love without needing to annihilate yourself. It means knowing who you are, even when the other is not around. 11 is still building this internal sense of identity. That is why love still comes mixed with fear and dependence. She loves, but she also protects herself from her own love. This conflict shows that 11's greatest challenge is not choosing between love or solitude. It is learning to exist whole within a relationship. It is loving without using the other as an emotional crutch. And this opens the space for the last big step of her journey. Because deep down, all of this points to the construction of her own inner strength. At some point, 11 begins to realize that true strength is not only in powers, but in the way she sustains herself from within. It is when she understands that she does not need someone to validate every step she takes. This does not arise all at once. It arises in small gestures of emotional courage, like someone learning to walk without holding onto the wall, a little insecure but determined. Autonomy begins when fear still exists, but no longer commands as much. She begins to experience the idea of being with herself without panicking. It is not immediate comfort, it is strangeness, almost like meeting a new person, because deep down, she never had the chance to know herself without depending on someone. It is discovering tastes, limits, desires, and personal opinions. It is the slow construction of an identity that does not need to be approved. This process is the same as anyone beginning to strengthen emotionally. First comes uncomfortable silence, then curiosity, then trust. 11 begins to realize that she can rely on herself, not perfectly, not always, but enough to not collapse. And this is already an enormous internal revolution. She learns that making mistakes does not mean being a mistake. Feeling anger does not mean being a monster. Loving does not mean self. Each of these discoveries reconstructs the way she sees herself. It is like changing a broken lens for a clearer one. Her inner strength is born when she stops running from herself, when she accepts her intensity without turning it into guilt, when she understands that she does not need to be perfect to be worthy of love. This is liberating and frightening at the same time, because freedom also brings emotional responsibility. She begins to assert herself more, even if timidly. Gradually, she begins to express what she feels without so much fear of losing. This shows that security is no longer only in the other, it is beginning to exist within her, and this completely changes the way she relates to others. 11's identity stops being built around survival. It begins to be built around choice, choosing to stay, choosing to love, choosing to distance, choosing to exist. When there is choice, there is real emotional power, and this power nobody can take away. This is the point where her journey stops being about escape and becomes about construction. She is no longer just trying not to suffer, she is trying to live. And this changes everything in her internal dynamic. Because now, love becomes a complement, not salvation. And it is precisely from there that her whole story gains a new meaning. So, after diving into 11's mind and heart, what did you think of everything she went through to discover and strengthen herself? Which part of her story touched you most or made you think about your own life? I want to know in the comments which character you want me to analyze in the next video, because every story has unique lessons that we might never imagine. And if you enjoyed this analysis, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell to continue learning about these characters and better understand the human complexity behind each one of them.